we conclude last story month with The Last of Us, a game that has been hailed as the last greatest exclusive for the PlayStation 3.
The Last of Us is the last game Naughty Dog created for the PlayStation 3, and was released June of 2013. It's been nominated for tons of awards and has won most of them. It's on a lot of people's top games of 2013. If there was a definition of a system-selling game that's exclusive to that system, The Last of Us would be that definition. I was talking to a guy who was a hardcore, brick-wall, die-hard Xbox fanboy who refused to buy a Sony system. That was until he played the demo for The Last of Us at his friend's house, and he immediately bought a PS3 for this game. It's ironic that what was considered probably the best PS3 game was released at the end of the console's life.
I was going to say that it's like the last fart before something dies, but that would imply that the game is bad. So that analogy is best saved for another game.
The game was worked on in secret for 2 years after Uncharted 2 was released. Naughty Dog was split into two teams. One team worked on Uncharted 3 while the other worked on The Last of Us. Not only was this the first time Naughty Dog was split into two teams, but it was the first time they introduced a new intellectual property in the same hardware generation. The concept of this game was created after a BBC Planet Earth special talking about the cordyceps fungus, specifically the one that infects and takes control of ants to spread itself. The idea of this fungus spreading to humans is how the game came about. Because the cordyceps fungus is a real thing that actually takes control of the brain of ants so it can spread.
This is really scary because this can actually happen. Animal-only pathogens have transferred over to humans, so this is probably the most realistic concept of a zombie apocalypse.
Other inspirations were 28 Days Later, a book called A World Without Us, and The Walking Dead were just some of the inspirations for the game. And there's a movie called Children of Men, and if you've seen that movie, well, I'll get into the story later. The game uses an improved version of the game engine that the Uncharted series uses. Some of the improvements made had to do with lighting, which this game does really well. It's a very realistic darkness, as you can probably see. There are times where the game is just black. That's how dark it can get. The graphics are pretty realistic for the most part, but once again, cutscene animation takes me out of the immersion with stiff and puppet-like animations.
I'd be kicked out of a development studio so fast because I would be spending way too much time on every little detail of animation to make it look as realistic as possible.
I find it interesting that games with cartoon characters have more realistic animations than games with realistic characters. I played Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction after this, not for a review but just for fun, and saw that the characters had more fluid and realistic animations. The music is pretty good. It's tense or creepy when it needs to be, although the only music I remember is from the advertisements. The sound effects are done pretty well, and it adds some serious immersion and creepiness. The infected moan and cry when they're just standing around, and when it's really dark and you hear the clickers, those sounds do give you that feeling of imminent danger.
Overall, it's a really good presentation, but presentation isn't everything. We still got gameplay and, in line with this month's theme, story to talk about.
The Last of Us is a third-person action-adventure survival horror game. Although I wouldn't call this a horror game because any horror elements are severely downplayed. While the imagery is scary and the atmosphere can be creepy, the game isn't really horror to me. The survivor elements are really good. Supplies are very scarce, and you're heavily encouraged, to explore and scavenge as much as you can for supplies so that you can craft into weapons or health packs. It really makes you analyze your situation and your needs because certain crafted items share supplies. A Molotov cocktail requires alcohol, as does a health pack. Ammunition is scarce too, but again, you really don't want to use firearms in this type of environment.
Would you really want to use a firearm in an area with infected with super hearing? Because that sounds pretty counterintuitive to survival.
While only the runner and stalker type of infected can see you, the clickers can't, but they have insanely good hearing. They're able to hear you even if you're in stealth mode, but you do have to be pretty close and not behind them. You can also focus your hearing so that you can effectively see unseen enemies. Similar to the detective mode in the Batman Arkham games, but it's more limited here. The stealth and sneaking around is on par with the Metal Gear Solid series. It's just that good. You can distract your enemies, human and infected, but that may not be a good idea as it can cause them to spread out and deviate from their usual patterns. This is a game that you really need to plan your strategy carefully and take your time.
This is the type of game where one wrong move, just one, can lead to an unsalvageable counter that will more than likely result in death.
The game makes it very clear to take stealthy approaches and not go in guns blazing, and the game's difficulty stems from how you approach these encounters. I found the game to be pretty easy as long as I took my time and took the stealth approach. but the game became extremely difficult when I made a mistake or decided to take a non-stealth approach, which resulted in a severe spanking. But I'll bring up more details concerning difficulty in a bit. The controls are a little different and require some getting used to, as you press circle to go into stealth mode and press it again to get out of it. I'm used to holding a button to crouch and releasing it to stand back up. Controlling Joel is a little stiff. Well, that's inaccurate. He feels really heavy and moves as if he's really weighted down.
Well, yeah, he's weighted down by his backpack, but he's been a smuggler for 20 years, so he should be used to it. But again, he is pushing about 50 years old, so maybe it works out.
But back to difficulty. There's some things that I feel that I got cheated on. The perfect example is when I was in the subway and there's 5 clickers and 3 runners. I didn't record some of this stuff mainly because I kept failing due to clicker hugs. But on my second to successful attempt, I was about to bash in a clicker's head with a brick as suggested by an online guide because I was having such a hard time with the encounter. But just as I was about to hit it with a brick, the game cuts to Joel getting mauled to death, which actually made me mad because before that I did a speed run and quickly and silently dispatched all but the second to last one. I don't know if it was a glitch because there have been times where I could fend off a clicker and get another chance to dispatch them. Or maybe the game rolled a 20-sided die and won initiative. But on my 6th and successful attempt, I went in guns blazing and laid waste to the place.
And now we move on to story, which I'm kinda conflicted about, but let's discuss it first.
If you don't want the story spoiled for you, please skip to this point in the review, because I know there's people out there that don't want this story spoiled, so this is your only warning. The story centers around Joel, a single father who comes home on his birthday when the cordyceps outbreak happens in his hometown. He and his daughter escape from the infected, but his daughter is shot and killed by the military, and then it fast forwards to 20 years later. In those 20 years, martial law is declared and there are quarantine zones where Joel is a smuggler and works with a woman named Tess. They track down a gun runner named Robert who has sold their weapons to a resistance group known as the Fireflies. You very quickly meet the leader who asks you to escort a girl named Ellie to a drop point.
I want to say something, but we'll wait till later.
It's revealed that Ellie is infected but is somehow immune. They fight their way to the drop-off point only to find the Fireflies killed and that Tess was bitten and she believes that Ellie is the key to a cure. Tess makes her last stand to buy Joel and Ellie some time while they go off to find Joel's brother Tommy, who used to be a Firefly. From this point, it's a trip from Boston to Wyoming where Tommy's settlement is, and along the way they fight off bandits and infected. Tommy directs them to a Firefly research center in Colorado where on the way they run into a group of cannibals. They escape and make their way to the research facility where the Fireflies plan to use Ellie to find a cure but would kill her in the process. Joel saves her and takes her back to Wyoming to live at Tommy's settlement. Joel lies to her about what happened and she looks like she questions if it's true or not.
The story is really good, but, and this is not a criticism, I've seen it so many times before to the point where I could correctly predict what would happen before it happened.
In the beginning, where we see a younger Joel and his daughter, I saw it and was like, yeah, she dies. Then we meet Tess 20 years later, and I knew she was going to die. Then when you see the quarantine zone for the first time and all the military protection, I thought to myself, how soon am I going to meet the resistance group and their leader who is going to give me a task? Then when I saw that escorting Ellie was the task, I knew that she was the miracle child who was immune to the virus. When I heard that the brother used to be part of the resistance, I thought, of course, the relative is always doing the opposite of what the main character is doing. And of course, the hero kills the leader of the resistance because they're just as bad or worse than the militarized government. But you can argue that the resistance is working for the greater good.
I guess I was just expecting something different. It's still a really good story, but I have seen it many times before, and again, that is not a criticism.
I saw Children of Men, where in that movie humans face extinction due to mass infertility, and a guy is tasked with escorting a pregnant woman to a safe zone, and they're in a very dystopian world. In The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror 20, a segment called Don't Have a Cow Man, where humanity is exposed to a virus, they find out that Bart is immune and they believe his immunity can lead to a cure. So they escort him to a safe zone, and that was a parody of 28 Days Later. I applaud them for the things that were different, like the cordyceps fungus being the reason for infection and the way the infected work is different than your usual zombie. And the government is trying to, or at least appears to be keeping people safe and alive instead of taking advantage of the situation to oppress and control them because they're just evil for the sake of being evil.
Because I've seen so many stories like this before, the problem stems from me and not the game, so I cannot and will not fault the game for that.
While I've seen this story so many times before, it's nice to see a game company do their own take on it, and it's nice to be able to experience the story rather than just watch it. And if you haven't seen this kind of story before, then you're really going to like it because it's a really good type of story. And Naughty Dog has done a good job with this one. It probably is the last best exclusive on the PlayStation 3 because this game is done really well. They made it as real a situation as possible. In most games, if you screw up, you can probably recover, while here, you probably won't. Just like if you were really in this situation, it really does a good job of stacking the odds against you, making it so that you really need to outsmart the game. And from what I've heard, Naughty Dog doesn't plan on making a sequel, which I agree with. This is the type of game that doesn't need a follow-up. It's fine as it is.
The Last of Us is definitely worth its weight in gold and is probably Naughty Dog's magnum opus, although I hear that Uncharted 2 is much better, but we'll come to that road soon enough.